Winter means eternally having my lips chapped. So. Hi, hello, how are you? If you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex, and it's lovely to meet you. And if you're coming back, we're best friends now, you know how this goes. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing well, and if not, totally understandable. It is, tis the damn season of seasonal depression. I totally get that. And hopefully you can find a book in here that'll pull you out of that, or at least make you forget about it for a little bit. This is the third installment of my seasonal reading recommendation things. Weird Girl Winter, It's a weird time. I have recommendations from like 5 different categories, if you will. So buckle up, sit tight, and enjoy the show, I guess. The first recommendation category that I have is woman being reflective alone in her city. And the first book I have here is Suzanne by Agnès Barbeau-Lavalette. So this is originally written in French. This is the translated version of it. So Suzanne is a really interesting memoir telling the story of Barbeau-Lavalette's grandmother and how she came to be the woman she was, essentially, and why eventually she abandoned Barbeau-Lavalette's own mother. And this book was written after her grandmother passed away, and Barbeau-Lavalette and her mother were sent to go through her grandmother's things. And through like newspaper clippings and underlines and books and journal entries, Barbeau-Lavalette created this entire memoir written in the second person, which is very interesting because it's like as if someone else is telling you your own story. So this was a very emotional read. It is very heavy in my opinion. It's a lot about like the art and poetry scene of the time. I believe it was the 60s, but I might be entirely wrong. A lot of wintry scenes in this, a lot of being cold. This just fits with the theme of being sad and cold, so I feel like it is relevant. It was awarded for the 2019 Canada Reads, the CBC Canada Reads, and usually those books are pretty good. That is of my opinion. So highly recommend it. It's written in like small vignettes. Each page is essentially its own story, and it's an incredible book. The second book in this category is written by an author that I've recently fell in love with, and I decided I'm going to read everything she has written. And that's The Cost of Living by Deborah Levy. This is part of her working autobiography. I believe it's a series of several books, but I've been wanting to read this for a while, and after reading Deborah Levy's Hot Milk, I decided that it's high time that I read this, and it was brilliant. It is all about her writing experience for several of her novels. She details a lot of these moments that she's writing in this shed on a friend's property. She talks about like biking in the freezing cold. So again, a lot of like loneliness, a lot of mulling over one's life about being a starving artist in the winter and the struggles of that. I think her writing is brilliant. She had a lot to say about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a wife, what it means to be a mother, and her opinions of those, I guess, like decided destinies for women and what she hopes for the future. The next section is just nonfiction. I just really feel like the cold months is a time for learning. I don't know if that's my little rat brain being like, oh, it's school now, even though I have graduated from a master's degree, so not in school, but still, I've read a lot of nonfiction this November, and I plan on continuing to read more nonfiction throughout the winter, as I generally do every year. So I just wanted to recommend a couple of books that I've read this year that have really blown me away. The first one that I have here is Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. This is all about 8 deaths of different young indigenous children who were found in the early 2000s in Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay, according to Statistics Canada, is the most racist city in all of Canada. And basically, the story behind a lot of these children is the fact that they grew up on reservations that were in fairly remote parts of Ontario, and in order to pursue further education, i.e. high school, they had to go to Thunder Bay to pursue further education. And a lot of these kids, they wanted to pursue college, so high school was a must, and it was something that wasn't accessible to them either on their reserve or any closer to their reserve. So they were living away from home, and 8 of them were found dead in very suspicious circumstances. All the cases were severely mishandled by the Thunder Bay Police Department, and it is just a very honest depiction of how Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples are treated in Canada now, because a lot of the times Canadians, I feel like they reflect on our brutal history of residential schools and colonialism, which is important. However, it is also important on reflecting on what's happening right now and doing something about that. And this was brilliantly written. Tanya Talaga, she's a journalist, and she just has a really interesting way of writing all of these anecdotes, I suppose, and all the stories of these children and what had happened to them. And I think it's really important because I don't think it's something that was covered well in the news. So this is a very accessible piece of nonfiction to understand what is going on in Thunder Bay and by extension in Canada. The next book that I want to recommend is an audiobook that I recently listened to, and that's Hood Feminism. And this was brilliant. If you have the chance to listen to the audiobook, I highly, highly recommend it. It's narrated by the author herself, and she just has a very electrifying way of narrating her book and talking about feminism and talking about the community she grew up in and how we need to rewire our thinking of feminism and how we need to approach essentially the feminist revolution in its modern self. This really expanded my understanding of feminism. I personally self-identify as a feminist, and it is something that I actively speak about. It is something that I am involved in. So reading Hood Feminism made me understand a lot of aspects of feminism I hadn't previously considered. And it really opened up my mind to what feminism means and the impact of white feminism on the movement and the considerations that we need to make outside of our own experiences. Because that's a lot about, what activism is. It's not just about fighting for something that means something to you or necessarily directly affects you, but affects a larger people as a whole. So this was a more holistic perspective of what feminism is, and a big part of the movement that has been neglected in each wave of feminism that we have already seen. The next category is just pure unhinged energy. These are both books written in the winter, and I think winter is a really great scene and backdrop for horror and psychological horror specifically, because it is just so desolate, it is dark, it is cold, and it is very quiet. So I feel like it adds this really eerie aspect to storytelling. So the first book I have here is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I read this a couple of years ago, loved it. I'm sure you all already know about this story. You've probably seen the movie on Netflix. Are you sleepy, Tara? Are you a sleepy doggy? Yeah. Which was directed by Charlie Kaufman. And this book is really interesting because it is a very intense psychological horror in the sense that I think every reader gets a different understanding from the story because we are all reading it from our own perspective and we are all deducing information based on how we piece together different parts of the story. Essentially, it's about this woman who goes on a road trip with her new boyfriend to visit his parents on their like farmland, which is ways away from the city. And a bunch of stuff just starts to go horribly wrong. It is very uncomfortable, it is very unsettling, and there are so many parts of this book where I was like, literally what on earth is going on? I couldn't tell you what happened. It's such a crazy read, and it's really excellent. And the movie is really interesting because that's Kaufman's perspective of the story, and he has his own, I guess, perception of what happened and what was going on and what each instance meant and what each character represented. So that's a very interesting one. The next one is one that I've been talking about a lot recently, and that's Terror by Erica McKean. I picked this up recently from Little Ghost Books in Toronto, and it was just absolutely brilliant. It is told like in 3 different stories of 3 different perspectives of this one thing that happens, pretty much. This girl, Frances, I think that's her name, yep, Frances, she's living in London, Ontario. She's going to Western University. She is a depressed girly. She's not having a good time, and she is just literally rotting away in her basement apartment. And it's come to the point that she almost never resurfaces to see her other roommates. Her other roommates almost forget that she exists, and even Frances herself starts to wonder if she is truly real. And again, this is a very unsettling book. A lot of like just deep, unsettling feelings as you're going through it, and then in the end, it really packs a punch. It can get pretty gruesome. There is quite a bit of body horror in this, so it is not for the faint of heart. But again, it is set in the winter, it is dark, it is desolate, and it is snowy and cold. Canada gets damn cold. Okay, my next category is books to get cozy with. In the winter, I generally like to read long books. I just like to curl up with a blanket, with a cup of coffee or cup of cocoa or cup of tea, whatever, and just read a long saga. I don't know why, it just makes sense for me in the winter to settle down with a long book. I feel like I don't leave my house that much in the winter, so I don't mind having a heavy book with me because I don't have to carry it around as much. So the first book that I have here is not an unpopular book, but it is a book I highly recommend. And that's Dune by Frank Herbert. I have read the first 2 of the series, and I have absolutely loved them. I've started the 3rd, and I have put it down for now, but I am hoping to get back into the series. This is a thick book. It is quite long. To be fair, the appendices also make it quite long, but it is on its own 600 pages. So it is a tome, and it is quite the generational story. Most of you know that Dune is about politics and religion and the spice and the worms and Paul Atreides, aka Timothée Chalamet. It is very complex in its ecology, in its science, and in its political theories. It is very interesting. There was a lot of flipping back to the glossary. I've even had to dog ear it because I couldn't keep up with all the characters and all the words that I didn't understand, but it is fairly easy to get into. Part 1 or book 1 within Dune is a lot of just introduction to the politics, understanding what the spice is, understanding the kingdoms and the planets, and then after that it goes more into Paul's experience, essentially leading his clan of people. This is kind of hard to explain in just a simple synopsis. Highly recommend it though. If you are feeling a little worried about how long it is, I recommend checking out the graphic novel, which represents book 1 within Dune. There are 3 within Dune, and it'll give you a little taste for what you're in for. However, I'm not super usually into sci-fi / books written by men, but I really like this. My next recommendation is another tome of a book, and this is something I've been recommending over and over, and I will not stop until every single one of you let me know that you have read it. Can you guess what it is? The Priory of the Orange Tree, baby, by Samantha Shannon. Let's go. The second book in this series, which is also the prequel, I suppose, is coming out in February, and I am so excited. I have pre-ordered my copy, and I am very excited to receive it in the mail and just dive into it. This was the first book that I read in 2022, and it was a good time. It is an excellent sapphic fantasy tale. It is a saga. It is an epic fantasy. There are dragon riders and slayers and witches and people that can control fire and gay queens, and it is so good. It is so good, people. I cannot tell you how many times I have recommended this. Just read it. Just trust me. Trust me. I will not recommend a book that is this big if it wasn't excellent. So just, what are you waiting for? Hello? And then the last section, I guess, is unhinged girlies. I mean, like, there's no way that I'm not gonna recommend something within that category. And the first book that I'm gonna recommend, again, one that I've been talking about a lot, I made a whole video dedicated to it, and that's Good Girl by Anna Fitzpatrick. This follows Lucy, who is understanding her sexuality and her kinks, I suppose, a little bit better by going through a lot of men, really. And at the same time, she is exploring her personality and her direction as a writer, and she goes on this adventure of like understanding the background of this specific magazine, which frankly was a lot like Rookie, and understanding why it rose to fame so quickly and yet burned just as fast. It is so relatable. It is set in Toronto in like February. Actually, I think it starts in December and then it goes into February. So again, if you grew up or live in a city with winter, you will understand so many parts of this book so deeply in your bones, like the pile of snow at the end of the sidewalk and like just like the gray slush in the streets. So much of this book is relatable. Highly recommend it. And last but not least, we have this campus novel, Bunny by Mona Awad, which quickly became one of my favorite dark academia, unhinged girlies, speculative fiction, absurd novels. This follows Samantha, or Sam. She is part of the English department at this university in like New England or something. Yeah, New England's elite Warren University. And in one of her classes / tutorials, she works with these women who she calls the Bunnies. And they're sort of a group of sorority girls. They all call each other Bunny. Like, picture the Delta Nu sorority house in Legally Blonde. That is what the Bunnies are. And one day they invite Sam to join their smut salon where they get together and they read these macabre stories to each other. And then just a bunch of crazy stuff happens. I don't want to spoil it. I went into this not really knowing anything about it other than the fact that it's dark academia. And I think that's the best way to go into it because it is just... no one knows what's going on in this book. And I think that's fantastic. I love not knowing what's going on. Okay, that's it. That's all. I hope you got some good recommendations out of this. I hope you have a great winter of reading and that my pile of books has given you something to look further into or look forward to. If you are looking for good gifts to give your bookish friends or family members this holiday season, go check out my last video where I recommend books based on like very specific reading preferences. Other than that, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.